You'll see us taking up not only in Readiness, but in the larger committee. And I'm very honored to work with Senator Ayotte together on the Armed Services Committee in this particular subcommittee. You are the key executives, service acquisition executives, who say grace and have control over this very, very important part of what we do. I certainly know from close family and friends in the military how much they rely upon the acquisitions that you make to help them perform their missions. And so this is about a process of understanding reforms that are already underway. We don't need to do things that get in the way or cut across efforts that the service and DoD are already working on. But we do know that there are a number of challenges in the management of acquisition programs. How do you develop the most technologically advanced solutions to some of our challenges, complex weapon system, under both the constraints of budget with sequester and other budget constraints, and also with a diminishing defense industrial base. Consolidations and other activities in the broader economy are shrinking that base. How do we balance risks? We want to try to promote flexibility and speed, but also try to balance some of the financial risks that can come with flexibility and speed. And what's the right balance there? What is the right level of oversight, either by the SecDef's office of the service branches or by Congress over the services themselves? Appropriate oversight is needed. Excess oversight slows us down and impedes our effectiveness. And then a huge issue that I feel, and I talk to my own people about in Northern Virginia and elsewhere, what's the right way to make sure we have the best acquisition workforce within the DoD? This is a huge issue. I, as governor, once faced a challenge of taking a massive organization, our state's Department of Transportation, that had been built up to be basically project providers and project managers, but over time the industry changed, and what they really needed to be was contract managers for outside organizations doing a lot of the work. And the skill set is not exactly the same. You got to have the right skill set to manage acquisition programs, and that is also complicated by furloughs and sequesters and some of the budgetary constraints we're under. So you're grappling with all of those things, and we want to hear about them. As I said, Chairman McCain has repeatedly made plain that he knows that we can improve acquisition programs, and we have to do it. You won't find a more passionate advocate against the foolishness of sequester than Chairman McCain, but he always says, we're going to do our best job of convincing others to release foolish budgetary ideas like sequester if we do our best job of convincing everybody that when we have the resources that we're going to use them in the best possible way in acquisition programs and elsewhere. So how do we get a system that's more agile, that keeps up with the accelerating pace of technological change? How do we continue progress that you've already made as a result of the Weapons System Acquisition Reform Act of '09 that the DoD is doing? So there's ongoing debate about the various role of different governmental agencies, and we're looking forward to hearing from you what the appropriate level of oversight is. With that, I want to go ahead and move forward. Chairwoman Ayotte will be here presently. She's going to cast one more vote and come, and then, as I say, you'll see us moving back and forth. But this is the opening of a discussion on a matter that I think is going to place some importance as we work in this month and next on the NDAA for this year. And I thank the chairwoman for calling this hearing. Thank you for attending, and I'd like to ask each of you to go ahead and give your opening statements. And maybe I can just begin with Secretary Shyu.
We'll see. Chairman Ayotte, Senator Kaine, and distinguished member of Subcommittee on Readiness and Management Support, thank you for this opportunity to provide comments on our collective efforts to make the defense acquisition process more effective and responsive to our national security needs. Defense acquisition is a highly risk-averse, compliance-based process with a checklist mentality that has become unduly cumbersome. Prior to my service to the government, I spent 33 years working in the defense industry. I would like to provide you some insight and share some of my program management experience in industry and compare and contrast that to that of a government PM. I was able to develop a sophisticated radar system in record time with authorities that simply a government PM does not have. So I'd like to expand upon that. When I was in industry, I controlled my budget. The government PM, on the other hand, doesn't really control their budget, his or her budget. On an annual basis, there's budget perturbations that occurs without regard to program impacts. So it's very difficult to sustain a program baseline. On an annual basis, it is perturbing. I had the ability to hold reserve budget at my level to mitigate unanticipated risks. There's no way you will have 100% visibility on all potential risks that could happen in the life of a program. But I was able to pivot. Within the government, you're unable to hold a reserve budget because it is deemed early to need. Okay. In requirements, we fully understood the requirements that's desired, and we're able to do the trade space to identify the impacts of performance versus cost versus schedule versus technical risks. And the government side, what I have seen, requirements are derived or changed without the full knowledge of cost, schedule, or technical risk to the program. Okay. Let's talk about stakeholders. In industry, the functional staff, that means engineering, finance, manufacturing, contracts, you name it, the functional staff are actually incentivized to help the PM to achieve the cost, schedule, and budget. In the government, there are many, many stakeholders. They're all stovepiped with different interests directly impacting programs. So what happens is, however, none of them are responsible for program cost, schedule, and performance, just the PM. Okay. Let's talk about tests. When I was in industry, I was able to coordinate testing plans with the testers. In the government, operational tester can add additional tests without consideration of programmatic impacts. Okay. Documentation, I was able to move fast because I can tailor documentation to my program needs. In the government, there's an extensive amount of mandatory documentation that you have to compile, okay, before you can go through a milestone.
Let the record show she showed a pile with her hands when she said the word
Taller than me. Okay, okay. Financial incentives. I'm able to hire employees and incentivize them to work overtime with overtime pay, with stock options, with bonuses. I don't have such flexibility within the government. Okay. Hiring. I used to get very upset in industry when it took me a month, when the human resource person took a month to hire somebody. Here, I'm delighted if we can hire the person in 8 to 9 months. Okay. So I think the best way I can talk about the process that we have in industry versus the government, I'm going to give you an analogy that's simple to understand. Over here, I have an acquisition bus. The PM, as you know, is in the front. That's the bus driver, okay? All of the stakeholders within the Army, as well as OSD and CAPE and controller and Congress, by the way, is on this bus. Everybody on this bus has a separate steering wheel and a brake, but no acceleration pedal. Okay. So what happens when a program gets into trouble? The best analogy I can give is the bus is turned upside down. So what happens in industry? Everybody would jump in to bail out the program manager because you are bleeding cash. There's a financial incentive to reduce loss. So everybody helps out the program manager. You will throw the best and brightest across the company to help out. In the government, what I have seen the 4.5 years of being in the government, they will shoot out the windows, the tires, and the kneecap of the bus driver. Why? It's an opportunity to actually take the program manager's money and use it for their stovepipe purpose. So compare and contrast the two. It's so starkly different. Okay, so it's this fundamental lack of program manager authority that's commensurate with the responsibility as well as the failure to properly align the various stakeholders' responsibilities for the program's success that has contributed most heavily to the critical shortcomings in the acquisition process, in my opinion. Okay. I urge Congress to empower the PMs with authority needed to help them guide the program successfully to completion in a manner that's similar to industry, in which I could move very rapidly. More documentation does not enable agility. Okay. So, Ms. Chairman, members of the subcommittee, thank you for your steadfast and strong support of the outstanding men and women of the United States Army, Army civilians, and their families. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Secretary Shyu. Secretary Stackley.
Yes, sir. Senator Kane, Senator Heinrich, thanks for the opportunity to appear before you today. Let me start by saying that I concur wholly with Secretary Shyu's characterization of the challenges, particularly that the program manager faces inside of our acquisition system. I would provide a slightly different perspective in terms of how we're going about dealing with some of these challenges. First, so it cannot be lost on this subcommittee that as we talk about acquisition and the need for improvement, that in fact we deliver extraordinary capability to our warfighter today. The challenge is that we do so at great cost, and it's a cost which is proving increasingly difficult for the nation to bear. Foreseeing the budget challenges of our current day, Secretary Gates gave guidance and warning back in 2010, remarking, "Given America's difficult economic circumstances and perilous fiscal condition, military spending on things large and small can and should expect closer, harsher scrutiny. As a matter of principle and political reality, the Department of Defense cannot go to America's elected representatives and ask for increases each year unless we have done everything possible to make every dollar count." And shortly after, Dr. Carter, who's then the Undersecretary of Defense, issued his directive on how we buy what we buy, which today we know as better buying power. So today, in building our budget, every program, things large and small, is subject to answering four most basic questions. What will it cost to buy it? What will it buy us in performance? What can we afford? And what can we do to make it more affordable? Simply put, we must change the cost equation. And we've gone about adhering to this by using 5 basic principles. First, get the requirements right. Requirements definition is the most critical phase in determining the outcome of a major weapons systems program. Requirements that are well informed by a thorough assessment of technical feasibility and a realistic cost estimate are inherently at lower risk of overrun or delay during execution. And 2, because today our services requirements exceed our budgets, the Department of the Navy has made affordability, or a cost, a requirement alongside performance in defining a system in order to drive capability trades needed to reduce the cost of our programs. And to properly define and seamlessly transition from requirements to design, to build, test, and field, to do so within agreed budgets and schedules based on realistic estimates, necessitates total alignment between requirements and acquisition. And it all begins with getting the requirements right. Second, perform to a stable plan. Our most successful programs are underpinned by stable requirements, stable designs, and stable budgets. Stability translates into predictable, reliable performance, unit cost reduction, improved material purchasing and workforce planning, retention of skilled labor, and the ability for industry to invest in facility improvements, all resulting in more efficient production and a more affordable program. And further, program stability enables the use of multi-year procurements to further reduce the cost of our acquisitions. Alternatively, uncertainty, delay, or changes to requirements or the budget or the acquisition plan all destabilize the program, ultimately leading to cost growth and schedule delay. Third, in Secretary Gates's words, make every dollar count. It's essential that we pursue efficiencies by procuring at efficient rates, leveraging investments across multiple programs, maximizing competition, employing open architectures, reducing overheads and bureaucracy, and sustaining a constant effort to pursue cost reductions and change practices that would meaningfully reduce program cost or risk without substantively impacting key requirements, regardless of what phase the program is in. In short, return to the basics of what our systems should cost. Fourth, and most importantly, build a skilled and experienced acquisition workforce. To meet our objectives, we must be smart buyers and 2, tough customers. And to be so, we must possess a skilled and experienced acquisition workforce. The Department, with strong support from Congress, is taking measures to strengthen this workforce, and we must stay the course. This is the single most important fundamental in achieving strong performance in defense acquisition. Fifth, foster a healthy industrial base. In the end, improvements to acquisition rely upon performance by industry. The critical skills, capabilities, and capacities inherent to our weapon system developers inarguably underpin our dominant military position. Accordingly, in the course of considering policy to improve acquisition, the effect of such policy on the industrial base must be closely weighed. From research and development to production, implicit to each of these principles, we must pick up the pace. Time is money, and time is stripping much-needed capability from the hands of our sailors and Marines. We've demonstrated the ability to accelerate capability in response to urgent needs. The MRAP was a great example. Production increased 100-fold in a year's time, saving countless lives while meeting the most urgent need of the warfighter. And while the rules and process may differ, we need to bring a similar sense of urgency to major program acquisition to deliver capability not at the speed of bureaucracy, but at the speed of technology. We must pick up the pace. In closing, I'd like to return to Secretary Gates' remarks at the Eisenhower Library. What is required going forward, he said, is not more study, nor do we need more legislation. It is not a great mystery what needs to change. What it takes is the willingness to make hard choices. Well, in order to remain the most capable military in the world, we will always face hard choices. Making the right choices, that returns me to the need for a highly skilled, experienced acquisition workforce. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Senator Kane and Senator Heinrich, for the opportunity to appear before you today. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Secretary LaPlante.
Senator Kane, Senator Heinrich, thank you for holding the hearing, and I too endorse strongly my colleagues here, both the bus analogy as well as everything that Mr. Stackley said. It's an honor to be here with them today. These are two remarkable public servants. They're actually role models for a lot of folks in the government as well as in academia and industry, and they're exactly the kind of people that we need in the government. So I just want to call them out. This is an important hearing. We have a solemn duty to the taxpayer and the warfighter to get this right. But this is a well-studied topic. I was on the Defense Science Board. At one point, we had a moratorium against doing acquisition reform studies. It lasted for about 2 years, but then we got back into it again. It is important that this ground, though, be looked at and continually improved. I welcome what this committee is doing, as well as its counterpart in the House to help us here. I want to mention one thing about agility. Senator Kane, you mentioned agility as a fundamental issue that we're trying to get. I had the privilege of co-chairing a study on adaptability and agility for Secretary Gates back in 2010. And what you fundamentally find out in agility and adaptability is the metric is speed. Speed is the fundamental metric. If you can do things fast, do it fast. Failing fast is better than doing things slow that may or may not succeed. The second thing you can do, if you can't do it very fast, if it's a modular type approach, say, to a big platform, then build in hooks, build in open architectures, ability for you to pivot as the threat changes, as technology changes, as the warfighter learns things. So agility has to be fundamental to how we do acquisition. And so I'm a very strong believer in that. I think it echoes what my colleagues here have said. I also think I'm going to spend a few minutes here in this opening remarks just to level set everybody. In science, it's usually good to get definitions on the table, because a lot of times you find out people are not talking about the same thing. So if you bear with me, I'm going to go through a few definitions and come back to this issue of people. So first, let's take your plain generic acquisition program. Most of the time, what that means is we have 3 phases to that program. We develop it, we procure it, and then we sustain it. Now, in the government, for our complex weapon systems that we deal with, we don't have the luxury, we wish we did, to go to a parking lot and buy something off the parking lot. We have to develop it. We have to pay industry to do the research and development. That means get to a mature design, get the test articles done, do the developmental testing where you learn where the problems are, get ready for production, get all ready to go. That's the first phase. That's RDT&E money. The skill set for that is usually a very sophisticated, deep understanding of engineering. The second phase is procurement. You're now in the production line. Okay, there it's a usually different color of money, different type of contracting, typically a fixed price type contracting. There you're after learning, you're after cost reductions. And then the third phase. The third phase is sustainment. Actually, it turns out most people believe, who've looked at it, 70% of the life cycle cost of the program is actually in the sustainment. So what you do in that first phase or that second phase, even if it might be a little bit more expensive, might actually save you money if you think it through for the third phase. Now, what is sustainment? Sustainment about performance-based logistics, understanding the depots, understanding how we spend our operations in sustainment. And I've found in my time in the government that if you can have an expert in sustainment, 20, 25 years, and you can have an expert in acquisition, 20, 25 years, I've not found hardly one person who's an expert in both. Okay, so that's just the standard three-phase acquisition. What else are we not talking about? Services. Department of Defense last year spent $156 billion in the acquisition of services. Services can be anything from cutting the lawn to launching our most precious national security payloads into space. Those are all services. Okay, different skill set, right? Totally different skill set in there, too. Different management. Okay, and then the third category, which Secretary Stackley mentioned, he mentioned MRAPs, rapid acquisition. Over the last 15 years, we've had a proliferation of rapid acquisition offices. Most of them are responding to rapid UONs, we call it. That's a totally different model as well. Usually it's an 80% solution. Usually it's the sustainment part is often put aside. Very different skill set, very different contracting. So imagine what all of that has in common. Very little, except one thing, people. The experts you need in each part of that system have to be customized to where they are, and it's what you were getting at, Senator, right at the beginning about your experience. So that is so important to this is the people. So I just want to make sure we're all level set on that, because oftentimes when I hear people talking about acquisition, I'm not sure which phase or which aspect they're talking about. There are promising signs, there are good things going on that should be built upon. I'm always a believer in looking at what's going well and building upon it. The better buying power initiatives that Secretary Carter and now Secretary Kendall have initiated is paying off. The should cost savings that all three of our services are having are real, and they're incredible. They're not cost avoidance. People sometimes say it's cost avoidance. No, very specifically, they are real savings. That's paying off. We also do have outreach to non-traditionals. We are running experiments in the Air Force with non-traditional ways to bring in academia or small businesses. Open architectures, which I mentioned earlier for adaptability, are a great way to bring in non-traditional companies and players into our system. We're trying things in the Air Force, I know the other services are, outside the acquisition 5,000, doing something, it's called Other Transactional Authority. We're doing an experiment next month on one of our systems to try to get folks under contract within a week if they impress us with one of their algorithms. So there's lots of these little experiments going on that I think we need to watch, pay attention to, encourage. And I would just look forward to working with the committee as we work on this. Thank you very much.
Excellent. We're going to stand in a quick recess so Senator Heinrich and I have not voted in number 3, Senator Heinrich. I'm not sure you have either. We'll stand in recess, and we'll likely start back up with questions. And I suspect the chairwoman will likely arrive first, because I think she's voted. Secretary Ernst, have you voted, Senator Ernst? You just voted on second or third? If you would like to begin with questions, we've just finished opening, and Senator Heinrich and I have to go vote. So we will do that in return. Great. Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone, for being here. I appreciate it. A lot of activity on the floor today. First, I'll go ahead and get started. I will go back and review some of the information that you've given already today. But first, to Secretary Shyu, if you would please, I have been looking into a number of different areas regarding program and project management, and this is an issue that we had actually discussed in visiting with the Government Accounting Office last week in the Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee. And for years, the GAO has categorized the Department of Defense's program management as high risk. and it shows up year after year on the infamous list with still very large problems and processes that need to be fixed and improved. And what specific steps are you taking to improve program management at DoD? And is there any way that we as legislators can assist in that process?
There we go. What we do to ensure the skills of our program managers are adequate, we actually have different levels of courses that program managers have to take, okay? And the other thing that we do, there is actual structure. So you don't jump in as early level being the most senior program manager. There's different lower level program management than the more senior level program managers. So within the acquisition process, we actually do train our program managers. They're mostly military with some civilians also as program managers, but primarily the ways that we train them are from DAU courses that they take. Also internally, we bring them up for assignments into the Pentagon so they can sit and listen and observe how programs are being reviewed. So there's many different ways we actually train our program managers.
I appreciate that. And then any comments from either of you gentlemen?
I would simply add, I was a career Navy officer. My last job in the Navy was as a program manager. Course training is interesting, but the greatest experience you get is on the factory floor, rolling up your sleeves, being hands on the project. That's irreplaceable when it comes time to actually be in charge of a major weapon systems. So we are ensuring that in our pipeline for program management, the first tour coming out of grad school will be an industrial tour, so they can get that hands-on experience and continually put it to work as they climb the ladder and become more competitive for the program management. And the panels, I sit on the panels, I review the panels, and I approve the program managers. I would tell you it's very competitive. We have stellar program manager candidates, civilian and military. The challenge we've got is depth and breadth to fill that base that needs to be there for the overall acquisition workforce.
Very good. And
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Senator. I would add to that the best indicator of whether a program manager is going to be successful at a program is whether they've been successful before at a program. And so what we have to do is do what Secretary Stackley said, which give them experience early so that they can, in a safe environment, learn the ropes so that when they get up to the bigger environment, they've already been a program manager. When I came into this job 2 years ago, I came in from academia and the FFRDC community. The stereotype I had heard ringing in my ears was that, particularly in the Air Force, was that we would take pilots and switch them from being a pilot one day and they could go in and be a program manager. That was kind of a stereotype, but I was surprised at what I found. The average acquisition professional who's running a program in the Air Force has 17 years of acquisition experience. They start as a second lieutenant, and they go up to 17 years. But they've always actually experienced more than 17 because they've done a tour somewhere else to give them experience. Second thing is they're competitively selected. The same thing as Secretary Stackley said, the Navy. We always can do better, but I was shocked at how different I saw the program managers and the PEOs, which is one level above it, which is typically 25 years of acquisition experience. And I also don't understand when people say, well, there's not an acquisition career field for the military. My military deputy, Lieutenant General Ellen Polakowski, is an acquisition professional. She is now going to be a 4-star AFMC commander next month, the top of her game. There is a career path. So I think that maybe we're not explaining the situation as well as we could. There's challenges there, but there is a lot of attention put into training our program managers. Thank you.
Yes, and I appreciate that very much. And you mentioned there are different ways to gain experience, whether it's on a factory floor, actual hands-on experience, whether it's civilian courses. And I was just going to jump in and mention an identifier or MOS. And I do recognize that it takes a lot of time developing those skills. But at the same time, it seems that the DoD has had some significant trouble in keeping program managers. Once they gain that skill, they seem to move on into other areas. And what can we do to improve that, keep those people that have gained those skills in that area, in program management?
I think we all have some comments to that one. Let me first describe that, yeah, you're correct. In terms of a military career path, when you reach program manager for a major weapons systems program, you're a senior 06. And in order to continue on, you either need to be promoted or you might have some runway left in your career to move on to a graybeard type of position. What we're exploring is how do you, in fact, retain those senior military to stay past that program manager position? What would encourage them? And in fact, it takes an appeal, frankly, to an individual's, it's a patriotic appeal. It's now that you are at the peak of your career, now that you're at the height of your experience, and now that you've completed your major command tour, we're going to ask you to go ahead and continue on to serve because we need your experience. We need to continue that experience in military, in uniform, in the government. That's a challenge. And so what we're trying to identify is, are there opportunities that would make it less of a challenge, make it more attractive for an individual post-major command to continue to serve? Are there any specific suggestions that I can just give you one example. So I know the Naval Academy and I believe West Point has a similar program where they actually take on senior 06s and put them in a permanent military position. In that case, it's as an instructor, but what they're able to do is continue to accrue benefits that come with military service, and in certain cases, in the past, what you've had is 06s that actually gain benefits beyond their rank by continuing to serve. In certain cases, it's non-monetary. In other cases, it's monetary benefits. So we're trying to see what makes sense, work with the service chiefs, and see if there's a program in the making there that makes sense for select individuals, not across the board, the select individuals that you want to retain for the long haul.
Very good. Yes. Yes, ma'am.
I'd like to expand upon that. Absolutely concur with Sean. I'll give you a couple examples that's actually happened. For example, it's absolutely the senior 06 that runs the more complex, what's called the ACAT-1D programs, right? And we have had very senior 06s retire, then come back in as GS-15 and also be a program manager. So that's a way we can entice them to come back even after they retire as a great program manager, to hire them back in as a civilian. The other thing is a lot of the outstanding program managers get promoted to program executive officer to run an entire PEO. Okay, so this is where they can then mentor all the PMs underneath a PEO. Okay.
And I would just add to that, one thing that when I came into government that, even though intellectually I knew it, but what broke my heart was seeing the people like we were just talking about, let's say a very, very talented senior 06, or in some cases a 1 or a 2-star, who the country has invested 30, 35 years in, has incredible knowledge, retire. And you just breaks your heart. And so programs like what Sean was mentioning about perhaps the academies. Now, one question there is, okay, let's say you get on the academies, can they still be a program manager? You know, that's a question. I have another case right now, which I don't want to give the specifics on because we're still working it, but it's clearly we have a star. We have an absolute star in one of the most important programs you could imagine. And we are trying to keep this person as a highly qualified expert, the highly qualified expert program, hoping it will work. But what you find even with the HQE program is it's not nearly as easy to do as you might think, and then you still know that you're going to have to appeal to the patriotism of this individual and their family to take this job and stay as a civilian. And we may pull it off, we may not, but we've got to do something about that because you wouldn't do that outside. You take your best program managers and put them on your hardest programs. You don't sit there and say, wow, they're at the peak of their game, go find another job, thank you very much. So we need to figure out a way to do this. Thanks.
Right, I would agree. And really, bottom line, we need to make sure that that we are working with these programs to make sure that our taxpayers are, of course, getting the best bang for their buck as they can, while making sure that our servicemen and women have exactly what they need through these programs. Do you find that a number of these qualified, wonderful individuals are being drawn away into private industry? Are the benefits and salaries that they might receive as a GS-15, are they competitive with what they would see in the private industry? Or are there, no. And I think I knew the answer to that before asking. But, we have invested a lot of time, energy, money in these individuals to make sure they're appropriately trained. It would be nice to use that expertise in these programs and the management. Secretary, any thoughts there?
You're absolutely right. I think the example we have had is we have some great colonels, senior colonels, who didn't make it to the GO level. That doesn't mean they're not great, because there's a pinnacle, right? There's very few get selected to the GO, but their outstanding program manager was lots of years' experience. So we have had the opportunity to hire them back. So we've done a pretty good job hiring back the senior. And again, this is because they want to serve. They can make a lot more money in industry. I can tell you that from experience. Okay. Okay. Being there.
Yes.
Okay. So it is because their heart is in the services. They want to continue to serve. So that's where we leverage their desire to continue to serve and bring them back as a civilian, and keep in the program management side.
Okay, fantastic.
I can't add too much except to say that there's no single solution here. We have Secretary LaPlante described flag potentials. We have 18 acquisition flag officers in Department of the Navy, and those are the best and brightest. We have a number of post major command program managers that are continuing to serve. They've been enticed, and they're continuing to serve. We found the right job for the right individuals because they love to serve. And then we have, as Secretary Shyu described, we have others that, in fact, retired and have come back as a civilian and are civilian program managers. Again, it's a great win-win for the department and the individuals. And then there's the larger number that after they complete their major command, they move on. They move on, and then what we look to do is, frankly, we look to have them to continue to serve, except in a different capacity out of uniform, and see if those skills can continue to contribute to what we're doing in acquisition, which is trying to develop and field the best weapons we can for our sailors and Marines. No single solution. It's a case-by-case basis, and we work with the individuals. One thing about the acquisition workforce is you get to know all of your program managers personally, and you work with them to find the right best fit for that individual and what the department needs.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Is that the highly qualified expert program, I think, is potentially one we could use more. Second is the program called IPA. It's a personnel assignment, an interagency personnel assignment. My experience is we're using it much less than we used to, and I have views why. So there's flexibilities like that we can investigate to bring highly qualified people in. We remember during World War II, there was, the $1 a year men is what they were called, very wealthy people. I heard a recent term for them called post-economic people that come into the government. Of course, we all want to be post-economic. Some of us are pride, but
No
we have to do something to get the highly motivated, talented people in this country to get into the government too. Thank you.
Thank you. And again, I just want to reiterate, thank you very much for being here today. We do have some challenges out there with acquisition. We want to make sure that we're retaining good qualified people in that program management. Whatever we can do to benefit our taxpayers is greatly appreciated, as well as making sure that we're protecting our men and women in uniform. So thank you again. I'll turn the floor back over to the chair.
Well, thank you, Senator Ernst, for holding down the fort, and thank you, Senator Kane, for doing the same. As you know, we're voting on the floor. I want to thank all of our witnesses for being here. And I'm just going to submit for the record my opening statement and just go right to questions for all of you. Wanted to ask a question about lessons that we've learned from prior acquisition failures. Each of the services have had their share of programs plagued by major cost overruns, schedule slippages, and performance shortfalls. For example, we've seen important programs like the Air Force's evolved expendable launch vehicle managed badly, resulting in a 270% unit cost growth. We've had the ECSS, not picking on the Air Force, but that's another Air Force one, that Increment 1 program took over 9 years and expended over $1 billion before it was canceled and shut down. We never had an acquisition program baseline on that one. Another example, the Marine Corps Ground Air Task Oriented Radar program has been 175% growth in research and development costs and 151% unit cost growth. An expert panel chartered by the Navy last year found that the program cannot achieve its current reliability requirements within the program's planned cost and schedule, and that the requirements do not reflect Marine Corps operational needs. We can go on and on. As you know, there are too many examples like that, where our constituents say to us, listen, we want to defend the nation, we want to support our military, but you all better address these issues. So rather than getting updates on each of those, would you each share with the subcommittee what you've learned from your service's acquisition failures, and tell us how those lessons are informing your efforts to improve how your service conducts acquisition going forward?
I can start with at least one of the examples you said. I'm representing the Air Force. And you asked me the question in my confirmation hearing, you may not remember this, about ECSS. And so having come in,
I have a better memory than me, but apparently I've been on this program.
No, it's a good one to be on because it's a great reading. The Air Force has done this process that I think is really a useful thing. They started it 2 years ago. I can't take credit for it. But it was, when you have an accident, a crash, there's an airworthy or safety investigation. Remember, we had this last year with the F-35. We are doing the same thing when we have an acquisition crash, okay? So the first one that was done was an independent review of the ECSS program, the one you mentioned. The second one was a small business program that had a problem. And I'll just tell you what the lessons learned were for ECSS. And I know the Senate Armed Services Committee has also studied ECSS. Well, first of all, to make a long story short, I think it's one of the reasons why the position that Peter Levine has been nominated for was created, was to prevent things like ECSS. The lessons learned on that came down to about 6 root causes, and they're very fundamental. Not understanding the data of the business system that you were even talking about using, not doing the business processes, because the whole reason you do an IT system modernize is you're trying to modernize your business processes, and you're supposed to change your culture. That wasn't done. And the analogy that the reviewer of this report did for ECSS said, imagine it's like the Big Dig in Boston. If you've been to Boston, maybe you know this, but you imagine that, remember for many years, it was, if you went into the airport up there, well, the easiest part of doing probably that project was going to a map and drawing a line and saying, wouldn't it be great to have a tunnel from here to here? That's the vision, that's the 2B. That was done in ECSS, okay? Here was the part that wasn't done. What do we have today? What's the traffic using today? What do the cars look like? What's the volume? That's the data. How are the users using the system? And here's most important. What's the transition plan? How are we going to get workers to work in the next 5 years while we build this thing? The today and the transition plan were not done, okay? So these are fundamental errors. What we did in the Air Force after this report is we took those same lessons learned and went with our DCMO, the new position, and went program by program and said, do we have any of those same root causes? And when we start to see them, we were addressing them. So it was a big learning experience, and I would recommend anybody who hasn't read that report, it's been provided to Congress. It's very interesting reading. The second one that I won't go into any more detail was a personal beacon that we had a failure where. It was actually a small business, and it came down to, I'm going to over-summarize it, systems engineering. The government program office did not do the systems engineering on that. It was something we call owning the technical baseline. We're trying to build back into our program offices the ability to be a smart buyer. So those are 2 examples I'll bring up.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. I'm going to go back to about a decade ago where there are a number of major programs in the Department of the Navy that had significant failures in terms of cost and schedule performance. And it brought to light, as you did the forensics on each of these, that we failed in step 1 of the process, which is understanding the requirements and what we refer to as getting the requirements right. And so this isn't challenging the operational requirement. This is when you set the operational requirement, having acquisition right side by side and identifying that in order to meet this performance, it's going to require this level of technology. Here's the risk that goes with it. Here's the cost that goes with it. So when you lock down the requirement, you understand maturity, feasibility, cost, and risk. And then you hold that firm as you move forward in the program. So with that in mind, we basically went back and rewrote our acquisition governance process to a thing that we call the gate review process, where today the requirements and acquisition community are lockstep, side by side, around the table in each step of a program, starting with the definition of the requirement, and moving from that definition of the requirement to transition to specifications, to a request for a proposal, right down to contract award and execution of the contract, so that there is no separation between requirements and acquisition throughout the process. You keep control over not just the requirements, but also the cost and schedule to meet those requirements. So we've found that to be a very effective process. The partnership that exists today between myself, the CNO, and the Commandant, I would say that we are inseparable when it comes to end-to-end from requirements to delivering that requirements in terms of the budget. And this has been a learning experience going back to some major failures perhaps 10 years ago, and we're continuing to improve as we go.
So based on my background, by the way, I've had 33 years in defense industry before coming into the government the last 4.5 years. And I was a PM back in industry as well, okay? So I have lots of experience actually designing, developing, producing products, okay? So based on my experience, when I've seen failed program, I've seen unrealistic requirements. The requirements were set not by what Sean had talked about, namely it was not necessarily informed by technical risks, by cost and schedule realism, okay? So if the requirement said that I want to have this capability and nobody challenges, that becomes the requirement. And then it's lobbed over to the acquisition community, go design and develop something that meets this goal. Every contractor will say, yeah, I can do it, right? I can do it until you're pregnant, okay, by the program. That's what happens. So I think one of the key things you got to do up front is do the trade space. What is the requirements you desire? What type of technology can actually give you that performance? And what is the cost associated with that? And what is the schedule it will take to develop it? You got to go through that entire trade space before you lock down a requirement and say, yeah, I want to get going on this program. That, not in the Army, okay. In the Army side, I don't see that being done very well, okay. Second piece I want to talk about is realistic schedule. Just because somebody dictated, you're going to produce this next year, physics doesn't, and engineering doesn't always follow what you dictate. So if you set an unrealistic schedule up front, you're just setting yourself up for failure. And I've seen that on program in which you squish the milestone because somebody somewhere said, I want this by this date, okay? So you work backwards into the art of possible. Well, if that was your end goal and work backwards in a development program that has high risk, you're doomed to failure, okay? And I've seen that happen. Third thing, really important, stable budget. If you hack away at a program budget on an annual basis, your baseline is constantly moving. You're standing on quicksand, right? How on earth do you build a foundation or program if you're every single year, it's changing? Three biggest things that impact stability of our program. Okay.
Well, thank you all. This is excellent. Appreciate it. I want to turn it back to Senator Kane for any follow-up questions he has.
Thank you all. And I understand that Senator Ernst asked some questions about the talent workforce, PM, and I do agree, and all of you said that that is absolutely key to this. I won't ask questions about that, but I think that's important. As we're looking at reform, the Better Buying Power Initiative is already about reforms. We don't want to do reforms that are overlapping, just creating more documentation requirements. We would like to do reforms or be part of reforms that are streamlining requirements so that they find that sweet spot between enough oversight to avoid problems, but not so much as to get in the way of agility and timing. What advice would you have for us as we're looking at drafting an NDA on what we ought to be doing to try to find that sweet spot?
Sir, I'm going to go back to my opening statement and the quote from Secretary Gates with regards to we don't need more studies and we don't need more legislation on it, and I mean that in the most respectful manner. We have tremendous amount of oversight, process, a minefield of rules and regulations that we're trying to navigate. So my first, with regards to a sweet spot, I think we have paved over the sweet spot. If it's possible, as you review this, to delayer some of the rules and regulations, this framework that we operate in. Secretary LaPlante described the big dig. Let me give you a different view of the big dig. I'm going to guess, Senator, that you've driven in and around Boston.
I sure have.
So asking what the sweet spot is like asking how would you fix traffic in downtown Boston? What would you do to the roads? And after hundreds of years of trying to improve the roads by adding more roads, they realized that it only gets worser the more you try to make it better. And so they decided that you can't drive through Boston, you got to get, in this case, under it. And that's what gave us the big dig. And so $10 billion and a decade later, it's much improved. But it wasn't by trying to straighten out the roads in Boston. So I would start by trying to figure out, how do you roll back to Goldwater Nichols? I mean, it was actually a pretty good starting place. And then since then, we've added 20-plus years of, 30 years almost, of additional rule and regulation in how to improve things. And it's made it harder, but it hasn't necessarily made it better.
Secretary LaPlante?
Yeah, I mentioned in my opening remarks that we did a study on adaptability and agility. What we did on the Defense Science Board is we looked at cases in the department of successes and in industry successes and failures. What adaptable systems? The ones that were successes all had a few things in common, which was interesting, maybe by accident. They all were relatively small activities, usually protected by leadership. The F-117, the stealth fighter. We interviewed Paul Kaminsky, who was the colonel at the time who ran that program. Paul said it was a small functional team, about 7, 8 people. They could make decisions. They were protected by leadership. They had a lot of the things that Heidi Shyu talked about in her opening. They controlled the budget, the requirements. They were allowed to fail, and they were left alone, and they were held accountable. He said, whenever we went around and said, what was this successful here? It all had the same characteristics, very highly skilled. What I see when I see those activities going on in the Defense Department, I see they're either there because the leader is protecting them,
Take on this whole thing, but anything that any of the other secretaries wanted to add, I'd be happy to receive.
Sorry. I was mentioning during the break that I think it was the first time I saw it as Exhibit A, when somebody did this, was Jack Gansler, who did a DSB study on urgent operational needs in 2009, and he showed this chart, and he said, Exhibit A, that's all I need to say. We can't do rapid acquisition with it. The next year, on our adaptability study, we showed the same chart and said, Exhibit A. But then what we did, and I think others have done this, so I'm not saying us, is they've gone to industry, non-defense industry, and they've said, what's your version of this chart? And it's, of course, much, much simpler than this. And I would recommend as a way to go is look at the work where people have done that, where they've taken and they said, how in commercial world do they make this realization? And people have done that, and look at that and say, well, why can't we make it more like that?
Well, they've used process like the lean process that can be used in companies that to be able to look through each step and eliminate steps that are unnecessary.
So I would say we absolutely need to streamline the processes, but enable us to tailor it, right? That's what we do in industry when we're designing, developing programs. We have a standard engineering process that you have to go through, but we allow the program manager the flexibility to tailor it. If it doesn't apply to my program, I can X it off. It doesn't apply. Just focus on the piece that's relevant to what you're doing. The tailoring doesn't exist. This is why we have dumb things we end up doing. Like, you got to go through corrosion. It doesn't matter if it's a software program.
Yeah, right. Thank you. I wanted to ask a question about foreign military sales. With regard to contracting for foreign military sales, it seems that the U.S. government is, in essence, negotiating on behalf of foreign governments against U.S. defense companies. And that's done by imposing the same standards, auditing, and regulations, what we would do if the U.S. government were using taxpayer dollars to buy a U.S. product. And after working to negotiate a better deal on behalf of the foreign taxpayer, it's instead, in reality, then we add as much as 8 to 10% markup for U.S. government services and transaction costs. These cost dollars then go to subsidizing, money, I guess, back into the DoD, not to maintaining the industrial base. And given that foreign sales are intensely competitive, is the foreign military sales contracting process really in the best interest of the United States and the long-term health of the defense industrial base? One of the challenges I think we're facing is as we spend less on defense, we want to maintain our industrial base, and where appropriate, we want to allow them to engage in foreign military sales. In fact, if obviously anything that infringes on our national security interests, that's really where the focus needs to be from our perspective on regulation in the Department of Defense. But things that don't do that, that we can sell to our partners, it seems to me that it benefits us because it helps keep our companies robust. So can you help me understand, this process? Because I learned more about it the other day, and I was somewhat surprised by the fact that we would be pushing back on our companies on prices on behalf of foreign governments, and wondered whether that was the best use of DoD time when the market itself would adjust any kind of exorbitant prices that the buyer was willing to pay.
Ma'am, I'll start and ask my colleagues here to join in. First, when it comes to foreign military sales, it's a win-win. It's a win-win-win. It helps our industrial base. It helps our international partners, and that helps us from a standpoint of security and affordability of our programs. So it's in our best interest to foster increased foreign military sales, particularly now that you see our defense spending flattening out. Right. And so particularly our major defense contractors, they're in pursuit of increased foreign military sales, and we're supporting that to the extent that we can. When it comes to the mechanics of the foreign military sale itself, that foreign country looks to us to protect their best interest in the sale.
Why?
Because they don't sit down at the table to negotiate with industry.
It's the strangest thing I've ever heard, because usually in a buyer-seller relationship, why would we negotiate on behalf of taxpayers in other countries? That's what I'm trying to understand. I understand our interest in making sure that we're not engaging in foreign military sales that could undermine technology and interests that we want to remain protected. But I guess I don't understand why we're negotiating for them when we're dealing with scarce dollars, and we could be better focusing our resources on oversight of our own taxpayer dollars.
In almost all cases, the thing that's the subject of the foreign military sale is something that we're producing for our own military. And so quite often they're either buying off of our contract or an extension of our contract. So there's a single negotiation that typically is taking place associated with this product line. And then if it's Australia buying F-18s, for example, they're going to work off of our pricing for the F-18. So we strive for a singular effort when it comes to negotiating.
So it never happens that they're just doing an add-on to our contract. So it never happens that they independently want something that we're not yet, we're not at the moment procuring.
There are going to be some exceptions where they might be ahead of us in terms of procurement, but those are
You
rare.
understand why conceptually I'm having a difficulty with this? I mean, in the sense that, some of the feedback I've heard is that we often, push our companies, but we're not pushing our companies on behalf of our own taxpayers. It's on behalf of our foreign partners, which I'm all for our partnerships with our allies. It's just that usually would be the role of that government doing this. I'm just trying to understand why that's necessary.
There's a separate avenue called direct commercial sale, where that other country could go direct to the vendor to procure the item. Then you start getting into security issues in terms of releasability, but that's an alternative. What they look for is they look to stay as compatible with the U.S. version as possible for interoperability purposes. And if we're in production and we're procuring, they want to get as close to the same deal that we get with industry as possible. With regards to a surcharge associated...
What if they didn't get the same deal? How does that hurt
Well,
us? Like, what if they're willing to pay more, but we're not because we're negotiating on behalf of taxpayers? How does that undermine our interests?
Okay, so...
I'm just being honest. I just want to know. I'm trying to figure out how that undermines our interests. Like,
The process starts with the foreign military sales customer identifying what the requirement is. And if the requirement matches something that we're currently procuring, then what we do is we put side by side what the requirement is versus what we procure and whether or not it is releasable to them
Right.
as is.
Which is important.
If it's not, there'll be some deltas. If there's something specific that they want, they might want their own missile integrated into an aircraft, that type of thing, then those are further deltas. But we have a baseline in terms of the cost of the item.
so if they want their own missile incorporated into an aircraft or some other piece of technology, and yet we're not really, that's not what we want. We would actually still, though, we would be the ones trying to negotiate the best price for that delta as well, correct?
If it's being done over here.
Yeah.
We do a pricing check in terms of the pricing as provided by industry.
Yeah, it's hard for me to get my head around.
Maybe, and I think you're asking good questions about exactly
Well, we're
what
in a scarce resource environment, and so I want to understand where's the best use
Right.
of our resources.
Right.
And our number one job is to protect U.S. taxpayers, so
Right.
that's what I'm trying to.
Yeah, so I think one thing, when I see companies going the FMS route versus direct military sale, they can do direct military sale. What they're usually getting for that is they're getting the government expertise, the government furnished equipment. For example, if the government buys a radar that would be put on there, they're getting the government's benefits, right? What comes with airworthiness sometimes, if you sometimes when you're buying an airplane, you want to make sure that the U.S. Air Force, U.S. Navy have certified it for airworthiness. So they're getting these kind of, think of them as government services. Okay, but what they also get with that is all the joy of contracting with the U.S. government as
Right.
well. And the contracting officers who are trained and to do their job as contracting officers for fair and reasonable price for using things. And so that's the dilemma that you're seeing here. They would, if it was a direct military sale, then it would be the government's not involved. Once the government gets involved, then we have to do all the things that the contracting officers are trained to do. And I think that's what you're getting at. Thank you.
Yeah, so I think it's worth considering whether every step needs to be followed through with the contractor, like it would be a U.S. contractor versus, I mean, with taxpayer dollars, a purchase here versus a purchase there. I also wanted to ask about New Hampshire is, of course, many small and medium-sized defense suppliers who do some incredible work. And obviously, especially on our small and medium-sized suppliers, the sequestration effect is even greater because they can't necessarily, reallocate in a way because they're a small supplier. And many of them, unfortunately, I think are going out of business. So wanted to get your perspective as we look at the impact on small suppliers. And have you had a situation with where we are in the fiscal climate toward having to go towards more sole suppliers or foreign suppliers for critical components?
I'll talk about that one. We do look at the industrial base, okay, and not just on the first tier. We look at the impact on the second tier and potentially the third tier as well, because the first tier guys will tell us our production rate has gone down to half of what used to be, and here's the impact that I am worried about via the small businesses. So we have had multiple workarounds. We've had For example, one program that we had a supplier that builds transmission that was really going bankrupt. So what happened, the prime actually floated money financially to help this company to keep going until they could get a buyer. So that's one example of what happened. In another situation, what we worked with another company that built a very unique product for the Army, okay? But we already have 7-year supplier of that product. Yeah. So we got lots of inventory that's sitting on the shelf. We don't need to buy more. But we told the small company, say, hey, you got to diversify. You can't have one egg in this basket, right? That's very risky. So over a period of 2 years, this particular supplier went from 90% dependent upon Army down to 50% because that person diversified into the commercial space. So those are a couple of real-life examples that we have experienced the last couple of years. And I will say one third thing, to give you one other example. So when we have had congressional plus-ups, what we have done, as an example, is look at the second tier of what's also potentially vulnerable and taking some of the congressional plus-up money to fund the second tier to make sure that we have the base at a minimal sustainable rate.
I think there's a tactical, like near-term aspect to this, and then there's the strategic. The tactical near-term is a focused effort all the time in every program to see are you maximizing opportunities for small business. Senator, you mentioned New Hampshire. One thing you learn about small business, they say all politics is local. All small businesses, it's kind of a local thing. In other words, the small businesses that we have around Hanscom Air Force Base up in New England tend to be the type that work on command and controls like applications because that's what we do up there. So what we've, and you contrast that with Maxwell where we have a lot of IT small businesses. What we're finding is doing a lot of regional roundtables with small business to customize and open up opportunities for them is the way to go as opposed to a wide sweep. Our small business numbers are up, but it takes a lot of work. The strategic comment I would make is I think this is why open and modular systems is really important. I really want to make sure people understand that. As we build our platforms with open and modular systems where the standards are open standards, then there's no reason that small business shouldn't be a competitor for a sensor and algorithm as we refresh them every 1 to 2 years. That's the benefit of going to open systems as opposed to a prime where the system is closed, which is traditionally the way we do it. We need to get small business into the open system market, is what I believe.
I would simply add that the comments that Secretary Shyu made regarding what happens with regards to cash flow and how we have to fill in the cash flow when we have delays for continuing resolution or in case of sequestration, things of that nature. Working either directly through use of things like advanced procurement, which we get in our contracts, or with a large defense contractor. However, what I found is small businesses aren't on the radar screen for most of our program managers. And so what we need to do is put it on the radar screen. So each program has a deputy program manager, and so each deputy program manager in the Department of Navy has been assigned a responsibility to be the small business advocate for all things associated with his program. So to have a watch on the health of his second tier, lower tier small businesses that are directly affected when we have ebb and flow in terms of cash on a program. And also when we change our production rates or if we're going to shut down production and go into a sustainment mode to understand not just your prime, not just your major subcontractors, but what's happening down at that small business level. Because quite often, they're not just unique. Quite often, they are the sole source. And in fact, your question, have you seen vendors go out of business? The answer is yes, we have. And we've had to go offshore as a result because the manufacturer in the U.S. was one of, and we've had to go offshore to replace that company.
Excellent. Before I conclude the hearing, is there anything that, as we look at this markup and trying to improve our ability to perform with the dollars we have, and, you know, we talked about this, but anything that you feel like we didn't ask you that you want to make sure that we're focusing on?
I think one specific thing is the DOTF fund for the acquisition workforce has been very, very useful for us. All of us are suffering from when the acquisition workforce was decimated in the 90s. With the DATA fund and other tools, we've gotten the workforce back up from the levels to kind of almost where it needs to be. And so that's really important for us to continue to do that. So I would just call that out. Thank you.
I'm going to pound that point. You asked about failures. What have we learned from certain failures? This dates back to WSARA. And 2008, 2009 timeframe, one of the more noted failures in the Department of the Navy was the LCS program and how it got out of the starting blocks. And one of the things that came out of that was the lack of oversight on that program, right down at the deck plates. And so you trace that. Well, what drove that? Well, the fact was that the acquisition workforce had been drawn down in terms of size to the extent that we are stretched too thin. So in terms of the Department of the Navy setting out a strategic plan for the size and shape of its workforce, and Congress, basically putting the weight of Congress behind that, as reflected in WSARA and the Defense Acquisition Workforce Development Fund, we've in fact modestly restored our workforce to where we believe it needs to be in order to support our programs going forward. That's under threat. That's under threat today because of the budget picture. So here we are today talking about what we've done to improve and the criticality of the acquisition workforce. Today, that exact acquisition workforce is under the gun in this budgeted environment and threatens to go back to where it was pre-WSARA. So that's a concern for us. You've provided incredible support in this regard in the past, and we look forward to that continued support.
So I absolutely concur with my colleagues, protecting the acquisition workforce, because I see a bimodal distribution in our workforce. We're going to have a lot of senior folks that's going to be retiring in the next 5 years. And then we'll get into even deeper trouble because we don't have a skilled workforce. And right now there's significant pressure in reducing civilian workforce, okay, because the force structure is coming down, okay. So I have a significant concern on that side. The other piece is, I will say, WSARA provided the sound system engineering. What we do need to understand is, what happens is, the interpretation of the law from this side of the hill to the other side of the hill, what happens, we reinterpret the meaning of the language, and it becomes much more onerous. So if there's anything that you guys take away, allow us to do tailoring, to expedite it, to enable our agility. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you all. I appreciate everything you're doing, and we look forward to working with you, and thanks for your important focus on this issue. Thank you.